We want to hear the stories from the courses that you've taught. Whether in a lab, a classroom, kitchen, on Zoom, or in a shop. Drawing on your expertise, we'll ask the probing questions. What goes right and what goes wrong when teaching your favorite lesson? Hi there, folks, and welcome back to My Favorite Lesson, a podcast hosted by Teaching and Learning at Conestoga College. My name is Dr. Lauren Spring, and I am lucky enough today to be here with Davor Maletic, who is a professor in the School of Workforce Development and Part-Time Studies, and he is also the co-ordinator of our Applied Manufacturing Management Program. Hello, Davor.
Hello. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great.
I'm really glad that you're here.
Thank you.
So let's get right into it. If you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about how long you've been with Conestoga and the path that brought you here to the college.
Okay, I've been with Conestoga College for almost 15 years now, and I guess I can start with the path. I'm going to say my adult working career started at ATS, where I did a tool die apprenticeship.
What does ATS stand for?
Automated Tooling Systems.
Nice. Okay.
Yes, it's a rather large company here in town. They've had, over the years, a great partnership with Conestoga College.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I did my my apprenticeship there, and for a tool and die maker. It was a great place to learn. There was like some truly great old masters in the trade that were there to help out all the young tradespeople, one of myself being included, that really didn't know much. And it was a great place to learn because they taught us so much. Even a lot of their way of thinking, I try to apply in the classroom because their thought at, when you have a problem, how do you solve the problem? It was in essence the scientific method, but it was just sort of the scientific method taught in a different way, a more applicable way. So it was really, really a great place to work and a great place to learn and grow as a young man for me. So there was great tradespeople there, got to learn a lot. I went on from there to a smaller company called Progressive Systems Group, where I managed in their automation division for about 6 years. And I remember wanting to sort of give back to the trades and to manufacturing because of everything that it had given me. And I ended up on a program advisory committee on a PAC. And through the PAC, I got to know people at Conestoga College and started to become a little bit more interested in what the college was doing. And for those of you that might be listening that might not know what a program advisory committee is, it's really interesting. I never knew that colleges did this until I happened to hear about it, which is to ask local businesses, in essence, hey, how are we doing? What do we need to do better? What can we change? What skills do you need from our graduates? Makes perfect sense, but unless you're aware that a college does that, you just think that the college sort of goes about its business. So when I found out about that, I was really happy to get involved. And at that point in time, I started sort of, paying a little bit more attention to Conestoga College. And there was a position that opened up actually within corporate training. Oh. And my first job was in essence to sort of be the liaison for Conestoga College corporate clients and Conestoga College to work with various companies to look at training that is manufacturing based. I was lucky throughout my apprenticeship and my time at ATS and Progressive Systems Group that I had a really wide range of experiences. So I was able to help clients out in many different areas, anything automation, welding, machining related. I might not have been an expert in specific fields, but I could at least talk to them and help them come up with a training plan. So that was my first few years at Conestoga College. And
that was, you were part-time at that point?
No, full-time.
Full-time right out of the gate. Well, look at that. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I have a fond memory of that time. I'd been here for about 3 months full-time. And I remember, I when we have new hires or, even part-time people, I'll often tell this story. After 3 months, Sandra Schelling asked me, So how do you feel? What do you think? You know, do you feel like you got the ground underneath your feet? I'm like, oh yeah, Sandra, totally. Like, you know, I think I got this figured out. And she just said, well, maybe give it 2 years. And I was like, why? Right? I go, you know, I've got this figured out, right? You know, I've done everything once. She goes, well, this is your first semester. Fall is going to be different than spring. Winter is going to be different than fall. And then by the time you get back to spring again, you have to do it all over again. And you want to get through each semester twice to really get a grip of how the college works. And it was just something interesting that I've always remembered. And so I'll often tell that story because it was very, very true.
Yeah.
And, you know, I like the fact that she sort of told me that, because I think I would have been concerned, you know, after a year in where I was like, oh, how do I do this again? What happens in the fall semester again? And so when I'm working with newer faculty or part-time faculty, I just like to tell that story because, you know, they'll go through the same things where it's like, well, I've done this 3 times, but what happens now? And shouldn't I know this by now? It's like, it's okay. You're not going to know everything. It takes time to understand how the college system works, especially if you've never been in academia, if you've come from outside to come in. It's a different way of doing things.
And I mean, that's really neat too, because you know, sometimes your first semester of teaching, the activities go well, the students are engaged, et cetera, and you might do the exact same thing in the winter semester that follows, and all of a sudden the activities don't work again, right? Or that's like, it's a different group dynamic. And so, I mean, within teaching and learning, we often consult with faculty who are like, I've done this 5 times and it's always worked fine and something's off right now. And so there is something to be said for that experience, right? And taking those ones in stride and thinking, okay, how do I reach this particular group of students about this content?
It's always different. And it was actually a really good experience for me doing the corporate training. And then while I was doing that, and then, you know, I started working with some continuing education programs. And I tended to do more and more of that as the years came by. But I was working as a support staff from an administrative role. So I was in the background doing everything from booking classrooms to making sure there was textbooks to, you know, being sort of the front person when there was, you know, issues with students or, you know, any questions or concerns that would come up. And that was a really great learning experience for me. So I kind of got to learn or see where mistakes happened, which was really interesting for me. And again, that sort of helped me throughout my career because, you know, working with so many other great support staff, like Tana Scaler was always working beside me too. And she was a great influence and a great help and sort of got me to a point where I could understand how things moved, what went wrong, how to prevent, you know, issues in the future from popping up and work with new faculty. And I got to the point that I was very happy and confident with the part-time or continuing education programs that I was administrating or you know, support staff right for. Yeah. And then I got into part-time teaching through that. Okay. So I've been very lucky that I've always had people around me that have been very supportive, various managers and chairs that, you know, were just like, you want to teach part-time? Great. You've got these skills. Okay, let's see what we can do. So it was really good to have that support within the college community. I taught part-time for about 4 or 5 years, I think 5, and then became full-time faculty about 5 years ago.
While you were teaching part-time, you were still doing your support staff and corporate training role at the college?
Correct, yeah.
Oh, interesting, okay.
Yeah.
So you're right. Yeah, that's such an interesting way to see all the behind the scenes goings on and then slowly move into the classroom, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so what are the types of courses that you teach this year?
So anything related to manufacturing, I've taught in the Applied Manufacturing Management Program. I'll spend a lot of time in the machine shop, although I haven't in the last few years. But metrology, 3D printing, capstone. These are some of the courses that I've taught lately.
Can you tell us what metrology means?
Metrology is basically the science of measurement. Oh, okay. So, and this is one of my, I really like the metrology course. It's one of my favorite. There's also a CMM course, a coordinate measuring machine course that I like to teach, which is linked with metrology. But metrology is definitely one of my favorites, and it's all about the science of measurement.
Whoa. That's that's fascinating. And what types? So students who enroll in these courses, I would imagine that it could lead them to a diverse array of different careers. What types of careers are students looking at, having a background in metrology?
Yeah, so the Applied Manufacturing Management Program does, all of our students are international.
Okay.
And in essence, they can, they're applying for jobs anywhere where there is manufacturing. Now, traditionally, it's usually automotive or anything sort of, when you think of something like a company like Linamar or Magna tend to be easy things to point at to say like, a job like that. But there's lots of plastic companies still in Kitchener-Waterloo area, some textile companies still around, and these are where the students tend to gravitate towards. So anything that involves manufacturing, because if anything needs to be made, it needs to be measured. And then you have to understand how to measure it and what measurement is, and what is how big is a millimeter, how big is a micron, what is it? It's interesting. A lot of our international students are fully metric. So even though Canada is a metric country,
and sometimes proud of it,
right? Sometimes proud of it. But if I was to ask you how tall you were or how much you weigh, most people would say I'm 5 feet or 6 feet this, or weight it'd be in pounds. So one of the things that we do is we'll talk about metric and imperial, how the measurement systems developed. And then, we have to sort of teach some of our international students the imperial or standard system, even though it's sort of the one on the way out. And the world is just becoming more and more metric every day. But we're so influenced from the U.S. that we still have the standard or imperial system within a lot of our measurements in manufacturing.
Right. And so you mentioned that if all the students are international?
Yes,
okay.
Correct.
And so are they mostly coming, with a lot of career experience into this program looking to transition to work in Canada, or is it a varied sort of background?
It's varied. It's really interesting. Like we've had, some men and women come in who are in their mid-late 30s. So, they've worked for, 10 years out in industry. Majority are probably with 1 or 2 years industry experience and coming over. And then there's a substantial minority that are fresh out of university. So they have a degree in whatever country they came from, and now they're coming to Canada. So they're hoping for Canadian education, an understanding of how the world works, how manufacturing works in Canada, and then hoping to get obviously full-time employment, permanent residency, and become happy, thriving Canadians.
And is this a good region for graduates? Are there lots of local opportunities?
Absolutely, yeah. So the interesting thing about our international students is they don't see a difference between getting a job if they live in Kitchener, getting a job in Cambridge, or in BC.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and I've always kind of found that neat because for most of us that have been sort of spent our whole lives in this area, we sort of thinking of finding local work and, I have a half an hour commute. But, a lot of them may have some family or some relatives, but they've left the majority of their family and relatives at home. So even if they don't initially find work in this area, for them, I heard BC needs this. Okay.
It's still within the country that they've set their sights on.
And they're off just as easy. So, I've been asked to do references for a number of students. So every now and then, I'll have a reference check coming in from a company that's in Edmonton or, all over Canada. So it is very interesting. But most of them do find work within the area.
Huh. I mean, that's a really interesting point that you're making. I suppose, if you haven't, grown up and have a whole bunch of social connections in this particular region, what's to stop you from saying, wait a second, let's go to the mountains?
Because, your parents, your brother, your sister, your aunts and uncles might all be in whatever country.
Yeah.
So if they're not here, it's you might have some new Canadian friends that you made in your 2 years at Conestoga.
Yeah.
But then, you're also okay to just pick up and go.
And so what then inspired you? So obviously you have a lot of experience in industry and then this interesting support staff, corporate training role at Conestoga. What was it about teaching that made you think, this is my next step?
So I think anyone that goes through a trade, if they're lucky, will be mentored. And it's a little bit more formal, the mentorship. Most industries will have some type of mentorship. Most companies will have some type of mentorship, but it's not as formalized, and you don't have somebody that sort of takes you under their wing and you become their apprentice.
Right.
And I was lucky enough to have that. And there was a number of great, tradespeople at ATS that I got to learn from that were just phenomenal. And when I realized how much they'd given me, and I would say, like, my gosh, like I'm actually good at this now, not because of me, but because of you. And like, thank you. The response was always, don't thank me, pass it on. Pass it on to the next generation. So I think I always had that in my head where I wanted to kind of, thank the people that allowed me to, do a job that I really, really enjoy. Like I really loved working in industry. I love automation. It's great fun. It's challenging. And I also like working with people. So it kind of all came together. I was... like I said, I was surprised by the whole idea of the PAC, which I guess I shouldn't have been. But, for somebody that's outside of education, the idea of a program advisory committee was just sort of like, wow, this is so cool. And one thing just sort of gradually kind of fell into the next step.
And that's so neat, right? Because you were part of that that PAC from the industry perspective. And did you feel during that time kind of feedback you'd give, like, hey, we want to see this from graduates in your program and they're missing this skill last year? Did you see that really kind of mattered and then impacted what was taught in the curriculum?
Absolutely. And the interesting thing about PACs, and I'll speak to something that happens sort of currently, is there's different softwares that we teach within the Applied Manufacturing Management Program. And I'll say to the PAC, well, should we still teach this?
Oh, interesting.
Because in my personal opinion, I sort of think that this aspect is a little bit outdated. But it's really interesting that every time I've asked to set a PAC, every single board member says, absolutely, it's needed. And I'm like, well, isn't that sort of like a little bit old school? And they're like, yes, but it's absolutely needed because of all these reasons. Sometimes it's different clients that still use the software. Sometimes it's even equipment that they have within house that, it's a 50-year-old piece of equipment and all the drawings are done in this software. So we need people that have at least have some knowledge. They don't have to be experts in it, but have, a good enough knowledge to understand the drawings and work within the software. So those things I find very interesting because, especially, now that I have been in the school system for so long, it's easy for me to say, well, why don't we just use the newest, coolest gadget or gizmo or the newest software, right? Why not? Why not? And so that's where I think program advisory committees are super for helping Conestoga guide the students to develop the right skills.
And if there wasn't that kind of communication and connection, then, maybe faculty would be jumping on the bandwagon of the new exciting thing and
for sure.
Industry folks would not see our graduates as preferred graduates because they've invested in this machine in the back room that needs a few more years of life and use.
Yes. There's, I think back there was, I remember when I was in industry, there was a pre-World War II machine that we weren't working on. It was just sort of beside a machine that we were installing, made coat hangers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was really, really cool.
Oh.
It was the largest, tankiest machine you'd ever seen. It ran 24/7 nonstop. It probably weighed a ridiculous amount just because it was all cast iron and all just very solidly made and just still ran. And the interesting thing was it actually had blueprints, like not mechanical drawings, but actual old-fashioned blueprints. And they were in the process because when I was working there, I was talking to the plant manager just because I loved seeing the machine. It was just amazing to watch run. And he had said that they were in the process of taking blueprints and then transferring them into AutoCAD. So I thought that was kind of funny how, they, at that point in time anyway, were looking for people that could work with blueprints, not smudge them, not damage them. Yeah. Because, these technologies, they stick around a little bit longer than we assume.
A coat, I would never even really thought of a coat hanger making machine.
Yeah, it was actually a great thing to watch. It was all cam driven, and it was like I find that sort of stuff hypnotizing because you can just watch it go continually move, and just bends the steel like nothing's happening. And yeah, it was a very, very, very interesting machine.
Absolutely. So I suppose you've been with the college then about 15 years now?
Yes.
Total? What sort of changes would you say you've seen in your program?
In my program?
Yeah.
So, well, my program is only 5 years old. So the changes are interesting in terms of interest. So we were working with a few people from the international office, and this is sort of before international students were coming in the numbers that they are. And I don't think we really knew what the future was going to hold. And we had sort of said to international, like, well, what are your students looking for? How can we help them? And the gentleman we were working with, I believe his name was Banu, he had mentioned that anything practical. He said that a lot of international students have theory knowledge. And, they've got textbooks aplenty, they've got great teachers, but they don't have practical experiences unless they, happen to work for a few years. So that was one of the things that we tried to do and tried to bring into the program and did successfully. And the change for the program, I guess, is the fact that it just was very, very popular. I don't think we were prepared for how popular it was.
Really? So you started, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
well, I mean, maybe at the management level or the chair level they were prepared, but definitely from my humble viewpoint, I was kind of like, okay, well, this is a good idea. I think this is great. Maybe we'll get a few students, and the students love it. They love being in the shop. They love the idea of getting practical experience. One of the things that we do in the metrology class, and this is sort of a day 1 or day 2 type of event, we take a micrometer, which is a precise measuring tool, and we'll measure the thickness of everybody's hair.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So an average human hair is roughly, let's say, 40 microns. Some are 30 microns. We've even had some people with 80 microns thickness of a hair.
Wow.
So very briefly, a micron is a millimeter divided into 1,000 pieces.
A millimeter divided into 1,000 pieces is 1 micron.
It was 1 micron.
Okay.
So 80 microns. Let's say 40 to 80 microns for human hair. And it's kind of fun because, we divide the class up into groups and we do this little game of, okay, who's got the thickest hair? And, students will look around and, sometimes people seem to have thick hair, but it's actually their hair's thinner, but they most likely just have a larger amount of hairs per square inch or whatever have you.
Okay.
So it's kind of fun seeing some of those differences because the students get excited because anytime there's a competition, there's always excitement, right?
Yeah.
So it gets the class going and, they're all like, no, my hair's thicker. So it's kind of fun. And then we'll measure and just see how thick their hair is. And it's an exercise for them too to start using the tools so they can understand how to measure. And
how would one measure with a micrometer, you called it?
Yeah, it's a micrometer. It's a small little handheld device. It's relatively easy to measure with, but it does take a little bit of feeling and a little bit of time to get used to. So it's one of these things that, nobody, it's not bad if they do it wrong while they're measuring their hair.
Right.
And like the sort of, I guess the hidden agenda is they're playing with a micrometer and they're using it. They think that the exercise is to measure their hair. I really don't care.
No.
Which student has the thickest hair, right? That has really nothing to do with the actual lesson. But the actual lesson is to get them to put this device in their hand and to measure. And then also having an understanding of a micron. Because when they can see that, so sometimes what they'll do is, if it's a group of 4, they'll actually take a hair out of each person's head and then measure the 4 of them to see who's going to be the, the sort of champion of the group, right? And if you look at my hair and your hair, and let's say your hair is 20 microns thicker, we're not going to see that by eye. We're not going to know.
Right.
So there's all these sort of little subtext learning things that are happening when they're dealing with these little exercises. So they tend to be rather fun.
That's beautiful. And that you said is like really early on in the semester. That's kind of, is that so?
Yes,
Yeah.
that'll be a week 1, week 2.
Okay. So yeah, already there, I love what you're saying. So there's like the lesson you present or the instructions you give them, but then you have all of these kind of subtextual things that you see going on. They're working together. They're getting comfortable with the equipment. They're figuring out how small a micron really is. Oh, that's so neat. So let's move into the lesson that you brought to share with us today. So this is from the Metrology course.
Correct. The key outcome is, discuss the fundamentals of dimensional metrology standards, interchangeability, traceability as it relates to various manufacturing industries. So what does that really mean as a course outcome? So one of the cool things about working with international students is they all have their favorite food, and their food is always the best food. And I love that, right? So it's one of those things that I like to sort of kind of have some fun with. Okay. And it's an easier way to think about metrology and the science of measurement if you talk about food at the beginning, because it's something everybody's cooked or everybody's at least eaten food, right? So we can look into if we need measurements to make things for ourselves, it's one type of measurement. But if I need to make things for somebody else, it's a different type of measurement. Not a different type, but the measurement needs to follow a standard. So if I'm making a specific dish for myself, and this is what I'll sort of talk to the students, is like, who's got a favorite dish? So somebody will say, whatever from their home country. Okay. All right, so does anybody else make something like this or similar or the same thing? Of course, a student does. Okay, how do you make it? And then how do you make it? And then there's always differences, right? And then so then that kind of leads into manufacturing because, if you put 2 eggs versus 1 egg, how does that change the manufacturing? How does that change the end product? Right. And, starting with food, it's kind of fun. It gives us just something to sort of chat about before we get into, a little bit more seriousness where we're looking at, brake rotors or something to that effect. But so there's measuring for yourself, and we try to kind of look at the history of measurement, and understand that when we were agricultural, we were really just measuring for ourselves. Measurement was a one-person event. You made something for yourself, whether it was food or actually manufactured something. If you were manufacturing a bowl to hold your food, the measurement was, well, does this bowl do the job I'm intending it to do? Right. So there's no strict measurement. Now, if both of us are living in the same village together, and I'm going to make bowls, and you might go out and hunt, so I want to have equal size bowls. Well, now measurement starts to become a thing where people will band together in a society, and work gets divided, so things become easier, so we can sort of advance as a civilization. And then if my bowl is, let's say, 80 microns bigger than yours, you're not going to notice. Nobody minds. It's all good. And the beef or the rabbit or the venison that you caught will end up in both of our bowls, and we're both happy. But as society advances, the need for measurement advances as well. And then this is where we start looking at the different types of measurement that we've had in sort of throughout time, and how that sort of drove a need for standardization. So when we talk about measurement, we're usually talking about the measurement of mass, length, or time, and those needed to become standardized for people to work with each other. So there's the standardization that happens sort of within one village, as in, you're hunting the meat, I'm making the bowl, or you're gathering the rice, I'm making the bowl to put the rice in. But then when we trade with different cities, things like weight became important, because things were often measured in weight. So how do you we didn't have kilograms thousands of years ago. Like we had it about 200 years ago, but that's when the kilogram was quote unquote invented. So these are the things that, we have to look at in terms of the history of why we measure things and how. And I really like this because the students kind of, they get very interested in this idea of how it all sort of came about. And it's just a really nice, fun lesson, because what we can sort of look at is like, so once we had measurements, you didn't want the measurements to be different from one city to another city, because then, your grain or whatever you've produced would have potentially a different value. Yeah. And then that just sort of, the need for standardization increases with time and with complexity. So now when we look at modern manufacturing, the precision of the measurements have to be to a certain level that we didn't even know that you could have precision hundreds of years ago.
Noticeable at all.
Right? The idea of the Imperial system. A foot was generally a foot, as in your foot or my foot. Now we each have different size feet. But when standards were not that important, saying it was 10 feet was fine if it was your foot or my foot. But then we had to say 12 inches. An inch came from the width of a thumb. But there's things like a yard from the tip of your nose to the tip of your finger and other measurements that sort of came in to try to standardize things. And in France, in 1790, during the Revolution, they actually brought in the metric system, which is really, really cool because it was a system saying, you know what, instead of using our bodies, or instead of using things that can change with time, because sometimes with the Imperial system, it was the king's foot. And if the king died and his son had really big feet or really small feet, it changed everything. It's all over, right? So they developed a system of measurement that was sort of a base 10 measuring system. That then we could look at a meter, and 1,000 meters is a kilometer, and 1,000 millimeters is a meter, and then you can divide that way as well when we're talking about microns earlier.
Right.
So going through that developed a whole new interesting type of measuring system that's more based in science. Like water boils at 100 degrees Celsius and freezes at 0. That's not coincidence.
Yeah.
Water told us what the measurement system was going to be. So we had something more universal. And what we found out with time is that even those standards were not precise enough. And even now, the way we measure a meter has to do with the speed of light and a Planck length, which is very, very interesting that we've gone to that far of depth of science to look at how we're measuring things. And that is the sort of global standard. And this is one of the things that we sort of try to talk about, because we need to think about this for manufacturing. There's a global standard saying this is 1 meter. Then there's international standards. So Europe needs to know what a meter is. So does North America. So Canada and Europe need to be as close to that global standard as possible. So these are our national standards. And then those national standards need to be the datum for every company's standard. Because in the way we manufacture now, it's a global affair. So we end up with parts being made in various countries throughout Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, and potentially assembled here in Canada. So if they have a different understanding of what a meter is, they're going to have a different understanding of what a micron is.
Yeah.
And with modern manufacturing, especially for automotive, any kind of machinery, your cell phone, your computer, microns matter. And then, we want to make sure that if the standard is different, we want to make sure the standard is not different. Because if it is different, things will not fit together properly.
It's so amazing because when I, rewind to your example, say like 300 years ago, that little guy making a bowl.
Yeah.
There is like this immediacy, right? Like whether he was making it for himself or his neighbor, whoever it may be. Now manufacturing's completely changed, right? You're making things for strangers on the other end of the world who you're never going to meet. You don't know what actually their needs are. They're the ones who are sort of deciding and ordering these products or buying them. There's a real, when we just think of, over the past, 100, 200 years, how that has
it's really gone
changed.
From like an artisan manufacturing, I'm just going to say back in the day, but we were artisans doing our own thing for ourselves. And that still happens now. Like, if you could find an artist here in Kitchener, he's not, if he's making a vase for aesthetic purposes, he's not concerned about the actual measurements. In terms of being repeatable, he's making it for the beauty of it.
Of course.
And so we still have that. But if he's making a vase for sale, he's going to want to make sure that he's using the exact same amount of material in each vase, because that's all going to need to be priced out.
Yeah.
So everything has to be weighed properly. Everything has to be made properly. So then dimensions start to matter.
Wow. And so what in this lesson do you think is most intriguing for students when you start to talk about this history and what it means today?
I think one thing we sort of didn't talk about, but I try to bring it into the lesson plan, and with more time I can sort of introduce it softly and then sort of come up to the big picture, which is that what we don't know what we're measuring, in the sense of we think we've reached the limit.
Okay.
All right. So we always think, well, you know what? We can measure to a millimeter. Who's going to even need to know what half a millimeter is? We'll never need that. A millimeter is way too small of a measurement. And that was maybe true in 1790.
Right.
And then we got, well, I think we kind of need half millimeters. And then I think, maybe we should divide a millimeter in tenths.
Holy.
And then you sort of get to this thing, and there's I do it as an optional sort of homework assignment for the students, but I have them, if they want, watch a video about the James Webb Telescope.
Okay.
Which the tolerances and the measurements that are required for that telescope to do what it does is, for me, mind-boggling. And so these are sort of like the cool things that we can look at, the idea of saying that. And right now, we think we know everything. We think, yeah, we've got it licked.
We've measured our hair.
Yeah, we've measured our hair. We've got microns. We know exactly what we're doing. Manufacturing will never change, and it'll never need to be more precise than this. And it's like, yes, it will, because we will change. We will, develop new technologies, new processes, and then we'll need to learn how to measure so that the components that we're putting together will just work better. If you look at, an internal combustion engine from the early 1900s, you were looking at tolerances of, 200, 300, 400 microns. And now things are within 10 microns. But if you look at how much fuel was required for X number of horsepower to the old engines compared to the efficiency we can get out of our new internal combustion engines, as an example, it's just that comes from metrology. That comes from us being able to measure, and that allows us to manufacture properly. Because without the measurement, we don't know what we're manufacturing.
Wow. That must be really thrilling for students. I mean, coming into this and seeing that bigger picture, right? Obviously, when they're working with the machines and everything is very applied, and like you're saying, the practical component of this program, but then, zooming out and seeing that bigger history and like, why does this even matter? And what does that say about how quickly our world has globalized and we're,
Yeah, and I try to introduce that in the beginning, in the first week or two, and really give them that idea, because what can happen is there is a process to learning. We don't do sort of learning by rote where we everybody do questions 1 to 10, but there is a little bit of, okay, this is our exercise. This is what we need to do. And that's never as exciting as the fun stuff. So it's nice to kind of have this at the first week or two to give them this sort of global idea of how important what they're doing actually is. Yeah. So when they are going through and just, I'll give each group a number of items to measure with their micrometers, and then we look at mean, medium, mode, and look at the variance of each part. The process of measuring a part numerous times can be a little bit unexciting, let's say. But when I see that the students might be a little bit exciting because they're just going through a process of measuring, I can bring back these lessons and say, well, guys, this is important, and this is why. And then it kind of gets them a little bit more encouraged to say, okay, yeah, I get it. And then there's just a little bit more focus and determination on getting through the steps of the process.
Mm-hmm. You can recall, remember when you said you wanted 3 chili peppers in your dish and I only wanted 1.5? And
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow, well, we're coming to the end of our time together today. That flew by. And I'm wondering, as we wrap up, any fun fact or leisure activity that your students and colleagues might not know about you that you'd like to share now?
I guess I can share that I've just joined a disc golf league. A friend of mine introduced me to it last year. It's fun. I enjoy it. Very novice, but I can't wait to start going out this summer. It's for a recreational league, obviously, but it's a fun sport. I enjoy it. It's kind of neat. So I guess that's something different that people might not know.
Beautiful and great season for it right now. We're heading into, well, we've just started May at the time of this podcast recording, so it's a good way to get outside. Thank you. Thank you so much, Davor,
You're welcome.
for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And yes, I look forward to future connections and continued discussions. And I'm going to be looking at my hair and all sorts of objects around me now completely differently, thinking about that micrometer.
I should have brought one in to measure.
Yeah. I'll come to one of your classes.
Exactly.
I'll sit on the back.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I'll be happy to have you. Thank you.
Well, we have come to the end of another episode of My Favorite Lesson, a podcast hosted by Teaching and Learning at Conestoga College. You can find all episodes in this series and more by following Teaching and Learning at Conestoga on YouTube. You can also find this podcast on Spotify and other places you get your podcasts. If you subscribe, you'll be notified each time a new episode becomes available. For 24/7 support for all things teaching and learning related, please check out our Faculty Learning Hub at tlconestoga.ca. I'm Dr. Lauren Spring, reminding you, as the great bell hooks once said, that the classroom, with all its limitations, remains a location of possibility. Until next time.